background object, I'm using a clean cup from a nice cream from KFC. It's basically round, the great shape. There's a bit of a hole in it, but we're going to fix that in a minute. You could also use 2 balloons and paper mache the ends of them to create 2 semicircles. I'm using a balloon to give a base to cover up the layer of the top, which is uncovered. Now I'm just using some plain craft PVA glue, and you put a bit in a bowl and mix it with a lot of water, and that will create your substitute to paper mache. I know loads of people use a special gel. This is the cheaper option, and I've used it ever since, and it's effective. Now I'm using just a bit of PVA onto a paintbrush and paintbrushing around the ends where I'm going to put the balloon so it keeps a hold on it. It's not the strongest glue, so the balloon will come off, but that's what I want, because otherwise you will have to pop it and then have the issue of picking out all the pieces of the glue. Now you paint a little bit over it to make sure the glue gets in the areas you want, and to also create a smooth base for where you're going to be placing your newspapers. Now the next thing you do is just get some plain newspapers and rip them apart, and then use the substance that you made to just cover them up and layer them as much as you can. For the top, it's important to layer it more because obviously there's a gap in there and you want that to be sturdy. Then I used just some plain A4 printer paper, which I ripped apart and used the same techniques to paper mache the bottom. This is quite useful because the Pokeball is white at the bottom, so if you use white paper straight away you don't need to paint over it. Otherwise, if you use newspaper you'd have to paint quite a lot of layers so you don't see through and see the newspaper. So doing this, it didn't need any sturdier, it just needed to be covered up white, and it worked perfectly fine. And then once you wait a little bit for the top to dry, and then you cover that in white as well, so that it's easier to paint over, and when you paint it in red the colour will be more vibrant. So you leave that overnight to dry, or for a couple of hours. I left it overnight and that's the outcome. You can see it's a bit of a rough surface, but I think it gives it the whole Pokeball a nice texture, a nice effect to it. There may be some techniques out there to try and layer it smoother, but I left it as it is. And then I'm using some plain acrylic paint that I think I got from Lidl. So you can use more expensive or more cheaper options. I think they give maybe in Poundland or some other cheap shops, and then you just want to place not too much and but not too little, so that when you add the water to it, it won't be too see-through, meaning you won't have to put too many layers, but it will be just enough. So I layered it once and left it out to dry, and then I added a couple of more layers just to make sure it was nice and red. You could also paint the bottom white to add extra vibrant, but I think the white of the paper was good enough. And then to finish off the look, I found a black ribbon. To create the final effect, and a black and white button to give the effect of the Pokeball button. Firstly, the buttons aren't purely black and white, so I'm going to use some cheap acrylic paint to just cover up any extra markings on the buttons. And then you want to clean your brush to make sure you don't mix the colours. I'm using a small one to fit in all the spaces and get it nice and detailed. And then I'm using some plain poster paint. I didn't have any white acrylic paint that I could use. Then you wait for the buttons to dry. This will take longer than the Pokeball because it's on a plastic surface, whereas the newspaper and paper will soak in the paint. What you want to do next is place the buttons on top of each other. And then you're going to thread a needle with black or white thread. You could also use some glue, some craft glue, any glue to glue it on, but I think that thread would hold it nicer, give off that creative effect that I'm going for. So then you thread the needle and you sew it on. You want to do more than one layer of thread to make sure it's sturdy. And then I'm using some craft glue, which is for sequins, to just layer the edges. I'm just using a sharp object, and this time I'm using a needle to just layer the edges with the glue so that it will hold on nicely. And then you want to just glue the ribbon on, trim the ends, make sure they're glued on nicely so they don't feather. And then that's the top finished. Now what you want to do next is just join it to the bottom, and your Pokeball is finished. You could add on some extra layers of paint, for example at the bottom, to cover up the bottom which isn't painted, or you could also do the inside where the newspaper is still visible. However, I left it like that because I like the way it looks, and you can see the layers of process that you went through.